The author had to stop writing this horror manga. Check it out.
Hi, Guardian Smite. I read a lot of the Crunchyroll.
Now, if there's something you need to know about me, is I'm not really big on horror manga. I've covered a few and reviewed them on the channel, but in general, the horror genre is not something that's always been attractive to me. Be it that most slasher movies to me come off as horribly written money grabs, or that just in general, I'm a little bit of a wuss. No, seriously, I scare very, very easily. However, in reading form, it's something where instead of it just being cheap jump scares and loud audio that just gets me jumping out of my seat for a moment, instead, they offer me a haunting experience, which pulls me in and compels me to the actual narrative behind the scenes. And out of every horror manga that I've read, I think none of them have done it to the degree as this one. PTSD Radio.
A
6-volume, just haunting experience.
Oh, nah, this cover look insane already, bruh.
Which it really comes off as all these different short stories, which you end up finding out are all connected by one common theme. Really, the imagery in this manga is some of the most powerful, and it sticks with you even days after reading the series. Now, admittedly, for horror videos like this, I wish I had a deep voice because I feel like it adds to the experience. But no, you just have to listen to me sort of narrate and talk about what's happening. I actually had a homie one time say I sound like I've had 2 sex changes, which if you laughed at that, I hate
nah,
you.
that's
now, the story begins with
that's
a girl
funny. I ain't
getting
gonna lie,
her
that's
hair
funny.
cut off by her grandma. Her grandmother saying that she had to do the same thing when she was her age. And then eventually we see her as a grown adult, seeing a reflection in the train.
Wait, y'all had sleep paralysis? I had that shit like twice in my whole life, I ain't gonna lie. That shit be like scary, I ain't gonna... You wake up and you say, whoa, what's this big dark figure? Pause. But you say like, damn, like this, is it over for me? Every other day? Nah, that's insane. That's insane.
Of a bald person, but as she looks towards the reflection, it twists in a horrified manner, as then something pulls her hair back in between the seating. Later on, we see her with her hair shaved off, talking to who would now be her ex-boyfriend, saying that she will return this to him, saying that all of these weird things didn't happen until she was with him. Now, that sounds straightforward, but that's not all of Volume 1. In fact, Volume 1 jumps between many different stories from what seems to be many different time periods with many different characters. But it doesn't only jump to these stories as in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it'll do 1, 2, 3, back to 1, back to 3, back to 2. It jumps back and forth a lot, which upon first read-through, I will admit, can be very jarring, and sometimes it's really hard to keep in mind which character is which, especially considering that a lot of them look alike at times. But there was something that helped me out a lot upon my second read-through that I noticed in the top left corner. Remember, these things are volumes, right? So there's many different chapters within the volumes. Now, next to the chapter, you'll get, for example, like 006 PTSD, and then you'll see a frequency right next to it. In fact, it's in the first 2 pages where it's made clear to you. You see, the first page right after the cover is this weird, distorted-looking radio, and then the second page is the list of chapters. But yet, right next to the list of chapters, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., to the right of them are frequency numbers. But if you notice, some of the frequency numbers start with the same 2 numbers. For example, chapter 1 is 89.27, chapter 3 is 89.44, chapter 5 is 89.28, and then so on. Some of the other ones connect as well. For example, you have chapter 11, which is 33.90, and chapter 9, which is 33.89. So basically, it's as if you were tuning in and out of these different stories as if you were listening to a radio. Masaaki Nakayama, you absolute genius. And so throughout the story, you follow all of these different people and events at what seems to be very different time periods, flashing back and forth between what ends up happening with them. But as it continues further and further and further, you start finding a connection. Imagery that is used repeatedly and that has some sort of significance and meaning. And eventually, as you start putting things more and more together, you start to notice that, how do I put it? They ended up pissing off a malevolent god of hair, which people back in the day, in the past, prayed and did a sacrifice ritual to using the hair, which is hence why at the beginning of the story you have the girl getting her hair cut off, and then they end it with a prayer called pray pool, pray pool. But eventually, as time moves on into modern times, people move on from that tradition, and they end up pissing off the god of that shrine. And almost an entire city of people end up being affected. It's really weird. And as I said, the imagery is truly powerful.
Nah, this is exactly what it's like having sleep paralysis, bruh. I ain't gonna lie, this is what I was talking about.
I think part of what makes this story compelling, and part of what makes Junji Ito's story super compelling as well, is that at first it just seems like the normal, typical slice of life story. Of course, reading a horror story, you know that there's going to be a twist coming, but it's never these outlandish scenarios and settings. It's everyday people that get involved in this mess. There's even sayings that are repeated, for example, the prayer, pray pool to the god, as well as it says, to malevolent gods there's no such thing as good or evil. All that exists is, all they desire is. And so eventually that will repeat later on in the volumes as well. And so even though at times the story might feel a little bit repetitive, like you've seen this before, don't worry, it has a purpose. It's all meant to connect together into this grander story that's being told. I think my favorite short story that we see is in volume 2, chapter 22, where it starts off saying, crows never forget the faces of people who mistreat them, so you must never throw rocks at them. Understand? And then eventually you see a character saying, my late grandmother always told me that growing up, and yet what does the guy do? He throws a rock at the darn crows, and yet those crows end up following him. Again, they never forget the face of people who mistreat them. And so crows end up showing up more and more. It doesn't matter when or where or what happens, but then he noticed that those crows were something more entirely. So throughout reading this, you could end up choosing what your favorite short story was. Again, all of them I think are really, really good, especially once you start seeing the connection between them. But the point in which the manga really stuck with me more than anything was in volume 5, where we get this entire stretch dedicated to a linear story told by the author. You see, the author had moved into this building in order to work, obviously, on his series writing, an office that he could rent out. And yet he found it really convenient that it was at such a cheap price. However, when he examined the building, he noticed that there was something there, a piece of a shrine, and originally he ignored it. But as time went on more and more, he started noticing strange things that would happen at his office building. In fact, when assistants would check out on that strange thing, the next day they wouldn't show up, and he would never hear from them again. Eventually, he would talk about this to his editor, and his editor suggested, hey, you should try using this and fictionalize it for a story, which is how we end up getting PTSD Radio. But there were also other moments where he tried to tell stories to the people he would work with, and then right after, they would suffer these strange injuries. In fact, he himself one day started bleeding from the mouth, and his flesh started to distort a little bit. He went to have it checked out, and it turned out he had this blood condition, something that he never had before in his life. And then eventually we get another stretch of this in the end of volume 6, where he talks about him wanting to release the story, and also talk about what really happened in his office building. But yet whenever he tried, he couldn't speak. In fact, there was one time where he tried to basically put in the story, and what ends up happening is he ends up getting this weird swelling on his face and he couldn't talk. But as soon as he decided not to follow through with it, the swelling went away. He went to the hospital and they couldn't find anything wrong with him. And so to this day, even though the status of the series says it's ongoing, we've never gotten volume 7. Now look, I'm aware that based on a true story is a big trope in horror, but I will say to see it done in a manga, have the author break away from the story he's writing to tell his own story, was something that I was not expecting, and again only made this furthermore a very unique and haunting experience. After reading PTSD Radio and seeing all of the different stories, so much different imagery that sticks in your head, it ends up really building a sense of paranoia in you, as a lot of things that end up happening is when you look into the reflection. Stories of people feeling things staring at them non-stop behind them, and they're scared to turn around.
These are the demons, bruh. These are the demons. Hey, Kayla, this be you every other day? I'm so used to it, though, so I sleep through it. This be you? Nah.
And so as the reader, while you're reading this, the last thing you want to do is look behind you.
This has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day. And...
oh, nah.